You're actually protected from cancers, some cancers, if you drink alcohol and wine. So the idea that alcohol is carcinogenic is completely wrong, because alcohol prevents cancer. So it can't be carcinogenic. And all of this uncertainty about cancer and alcohol is never explained to the public.
Today's guest is Mr. Tony Edwards, who is the author of 2 books. The first is called The Good News About Booze, which is published in 2013, and his latest book, The Very Good News About Wine, Authoritative Health Evidence the Health Authorities Do Not Tell You. So, Tony, what is that authoritative health evidence that the authorities don't tell us about booze and wine?
Well, the authorities don't tell you that alcohol is actually very good for you, for your health, because they want the message they want to give people is that it's bad for your health, indeed as bad as tobacco, which is utterly ludicrous, because the evidence is overwhelming that while tobacco is really harmful to your health, wine and alcohol in general is actually good for your health up to a certain level. It's it's a rather paradoxical substance. Alcohol, obviously, if you drink too much, you'll kill yourself anyway, because you'll die of neurological problems. But the thing that the authorities try to do is scare us into giving up alcohol, because they say it's extremely bad for your health, which is a complete lie. At a certain level, at low levels, it's very good for your health. At high levels, it can be dangerous, but not nearly as dangerous as tobacco. I've got a couple of graphs that actually I've given you, which illustrate that. The graph with the red line is the extra risk caused if you're a smoker. The extra risk, so the line goes up. The more the line goes up, the more the risk of ill health. But if you compare that with drinking wine, if you change to the blue graph now, wine does the opposite. It goes down, the risk goes down as you drink. Then the more you drink, it starts to go back up again, and goes and then becomes rather harmful. Now, the middle line, the black line, is actually it's what people who don't drink. That's their level of risk. So what you're comparing is the level of risk of people who don't drink with people who do drink. And you can see on the blue line, it goes down for those people who drink a little amount. And of course, it starts to go back up again as the alcohol. The actual alcohol is a poisonous, which is a toxin. If you drink more alcohol, it gets a little bit more dangerous to your health. But the authorities just want to kind of don't want to tell you about. This is called the J curve, by the way. So the graph looks like a J. The authorities don't want you to know about that, so they suppress the information. And as we all know, recently the WHO, for example, has been conducting the most extraordinary campaign about alcohol, saying, one drop will send you to an early grave, which is utter nonsense.
I'd like to ask, what was the incentives? Because now I don't know all the facts, but people drank a lot of alcohol back in the day. We didn't have a lot of study. People didn't really know the effects. But what do you think the incentive for the authorities to then paint the picture that alcohol bad, and since when?
Well, since when is actually since about the last 10 years they've been really going hammer and tongs about it. But I think you better ask them what their motivation is. I think it's a combination of hair shirtism, a combination of authoritarianism, totalitarianism. They don't want people to enjoy themselves. And of course, in the old days, back in the 19th century, there was the movement called the temperance movement, which is a perfectly sensible thing to have, because men did beat up their wives when they got pissed. It was a nasty kind of environment for women. And, the temperance movement had a lot of sense in it, that trying to discourage people from drinking too much and killing their wives. But, it's that people don't do that anymore. So the temperance movement has now morphed into a health movement, and they've taken everything that they can out of the tobacco playbook. And, they're now trying to say that alcohol is as dangerous as tobacco, which I've already said is not true at all. In fact, quite the reverse is the case. as those two graphs I talked about show you. And they're also now talking about putting labels on bottles of wine and alcohol, saying that it could cause cancer, like they do on tobacco packets. And of course, it is very true for tobacco that it does cause cancer, particularly lung cancer and other things besides. With wine, and wine and alcohol in general, it's a very mixed picture. So mixed, in fact, that some cancers are actually protected. You are actually protected from some cancers, if you drink alcohol and wine. So the idea that alcohol is carcinogenic is completely wrong because alcohol prevents cancer. So it can't be carcinogenic. So it's a big puzzle there. And actually, if you look at the medical research literature, which I have done for both these books in some detail, everybody behind closed doors, of course, not telling the public this, everybody says it's all rather a mixed picture. We're not quite sure what's going on. Oh, no, we don't think one study doesn't agree with another. And all of this uncertainty about cancer and alcohol is never explained to the public. It's put out by people like the WHO that actually is an open and shut case. Alcohol causes cancer, end of story, thou shalt not drink, which is obviously completely wrong. It is actually criminally, I would say, false. Because it's criminal to lie to people about the health benefits of something, which actually could be of benefit to their health. I think people need to know the facts, and that's what my books have shown.
Speaking about Puritanism, in the last video we did, one of the comments I thought was interesting, because since we're talking about Puritanism, but the comment was, I don't think it's so much Puritanism or not wanting people to have fun. I think they want to place the blame or focus on alcohol to take the focus off processed foods and pharmaceuticals and their effect on their health, both of which are industries of the global elite. Don't drink wine, but consume refined sugars, consume starches, emulsifiers, preservatives, dyes, and all these other unnatural things. And it does seem like you could have a horrible diet of eating, all these carbohydrates and other things they tell you. But it's like, oh, no, you're fat and diabetic because of the alcohol, not because you're eating a crap diet of all these other shitty carbohydrates and whatnot. I mean, what do you think of this comment? I actually thought that was the best comment that I saw.
I think you could be right that they're trying to deflect attention from who the real culprits are in this health crisis we've got. But alcohol, for example, the biggest health crisis, as we all know, is obesity. Now, alcohol, curiously, although it's very high in calories, and therefore, in theory, puts on weight, it actually does not. And that was what actually got me into first into this whole area. I was doing an article about calories, and I thought I completely stumbled upon the fact that when you drink alcohol, it actually does not put on weight. And there are a number of studies showing that despite the fact that it's very high in calories, if you substitute food calories for alcohol calories, in other words, you take away the food and you put alcohol back calorie for calorie, you will actually lose weight. This is a really counterintuitive fact, which got me started on the whole area of alcohol, because before that I had no particular interest in the area. I just thought, well, the authorities are obviously right. It's, because it's, probably is as bad as tobacco. I just accepted it. Like we all accepted the COVID narrative and the vaccine narrative and so on and so forth. So there's an awful lot of misinformation out about that. And I think the other thing is too that, for example, so going back in history now, when prohibition was ended in 1920s in America, there was a big federal bureau called the Bureau of something or other, headed by a guy called Harry Anslinger. And so when prohibition was ended, so all of Anslinger's mates had nothing else to do because prohibition had ceased. And he looked around for something else to go for, and he said, oh, there's that stuff called, what about that reefer stuff, that cannabis stuff? Why don't we go for that? And so he just switched. He switched his. He had this agency, it was anti-alcohol agency, and then he had to find something else for his men to do. And that was when cannabis started to become prohibited in America. So I think a lot of it is bureaucracy, to be honest. I think the same thing, going back to alcohol and tobacco, the authorities have won the battle against tobacco. Everybody realizes that it's bad to smoke. So what else can they attack? Oh, alcohol. Why don't we attack that? And so it could be a number of just all these people who just want to spoil everyone's fun. They just want something else to attack.
Yeah, can't smoke weed because you're having too much fun. Can't drink alcohol, you're having too much fun. But when I was growing up, they the one thing I knew about it, they said, "Oh, your kidneys can't process alcohol. It will damage your kidneys if you
your liver or your kidneys."
Oh, liver. Sorry, not kidneys. Liver. Yeah. It was a liver. So, talk about like how does the body process alcohol exactly? Is that a myth? Like, is the liver totally fine dealing with it? And you BP it out, that kind of thing. Like, is that whole thing a myth? And I've just been duped.
Well, there are two questions there, two answers there. One is that alcohol is processed by the liver correctly, and there are enzymes that the body has, naturally has, to process alcohol. And the interesting thing about the enzymes is, why should we have enzymes to process alcohol? That's partly because we are fruit eaters. And fruit, when it goes off, does produce a little bit of alcohol. So the body's got these enzymes in to kind of detoxify this, quote unquote, poison. And women and men have both got, but women have got fewer enzymes than men, which is why women are not as good at processing as alcohol as men are. Nobody knows why there's a sex difference, but the fact is, even if you're a rat, even male rats can process alcohol better than female rats. So it's the sex difference there. But the whole liver question is actually, it's very, very complicated because liver cancer, it's obviously the thing people are most worried about, is very rare indeed, even amongst alcoholics. You have to drink a huge amount of spirits every day. There's a study done in Sweden, I'm thinking, a huge amount of hooch every day for 15 years before you have a risk of liver cancer. I mean, that is astonishing. And nobody ever tells you that. There's cirrhosis, of course, but again, the picture is extremely complicated. I've done quite a lot of studies in Italy where they show that if you drink 2 or 3 bottles of wine a day, your risk of liver cancer is very, very low indeed. So, again, that's one of the things that obviously everyone talks about liver, but it's, a lot of this scare stuff is exaggerated, basically.
You said, you have to drink absurd amounts of spirits every day for 15 years for there to cause some significant problems. How much exactly, so I know when to stop? I'm joking.
From memory, it's 150 grams of spirits.
Okay, 150 grams.
Basically, it's a good sized bottle of gin.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's about, it's a half-sized bottle of gin, not the sort of big one. One of the every day for 15 years, and then only about 12% of people who drink to that level get liver cirrhosis. Only 12%. That's 1 in 5 people, 4 in 5 people don't get it. So it's a very, very muddy and mixed picture.
Yeah. You're saying 150 grams of actual pure alcohol, which is what the equivalent of like 10 shots, something like that, at least 10 shots in the U.S., right around that, 10, 11?
It's at least that, yeah. Half a bottle of gin is it's a lot of spirits.
I think
we'll stop at 9.
I think a shot is 15. I think a standard shot is right around 15 grams. So it'd be basically 10. It depends on the country. I think it's 10 or 11 shots.
That's about, our shots are about 11 grams. Yeah.
And in the UK, I know in Australia I know the shots are bigger in the US compared to Australia when I was living there.
Yeah. Anyway,
Well, that's quite a bit. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's definitely a lot.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because I didn't think I'd be able to talk with someone who kind of like debunk some of these things. But let me ask you this. Now, I'm not sure if you're a believer. Our body knows, our body is incredibly intelligent, right? So if you're hurting or dehydrated, it tells you. It tells you when it wants to eat. It tells you when you're thirsty. It makes you feel it. Now, if I drink alcohol and let's say I go I'm 2 drinks and a done type of person, I can easily, it's headaches, and all of that. Now, is that my body telling me that it's no good? Is that, if I'm waking up with a hangover, or is that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think what you said earlier is right. I think you should listen to your body. Because I think we have our immune system. It's a very, very, very clever piece of engineering, and which does seem to communicate with the brain. And I think you should listen to what your brain says. If you feel like a drink, have one. If you don't feel like a drink, don't have one. And in terms of hangovers, I think it's very clever that Mother Nature kind of is aversion therapy from Mother Nature, saying, you have drunk too much when you get a hangover, so don't do it again, drink less. The whole thing is very, very cleverly worked out, and I'm not quite sure why Mother Nature is so clever. The other thing in my book, I mentioned the fact that Mother Nature is what we have a circadian rhythm in terms of an enzyme function with detoxifying alcohol. In the morning, you can detoxify it very, very badly indeed. And then as the day goes on, your ability to detoxify alcohol increases, and it maximizes around 6 o'clock in the evening. Now, that, as it happens to be the time that alcohol is its most effective in terms of being beneficial to your health. So Mother Nature is actually guiding you not to drink in the morning, because Mother Nature can't process the alcohol then. And it's guiding you to a time of the day when actually it can process the alcohol most efficiently and be therefore most beneficial to your health. It's really a clever, the human body is so clever. It really is.
And you're saying, what time does the body then process the alcohol the best, would you say? Like afternoon, evening? And that's sort of the standard?
6 p.m., roughly.
6 p.m.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And then it falls off through the night. And by the time you wake up in the morning, it's not really there at all. I mean, this is why alcoholics, you can always tell an alcoholic because he or she drinks in the morning, because he gets a real hit from the booze, a much bigger hit from the booze in the morning than he does in the evening. So that's another reason, as I say in my book, don't drink if you don't want to be an alcoholic. Don't drink in the morning. If you're tempted to drink in the morning, do not, because you will get such a huge hit, which would be, if you're that sort of personality, you'll enjoy it too much, and you're on the road to ruin then. So my book very clearly shows a lot of evidence that drinking moderately in the evening with meals, dinner, clearly, is the most health-promoting and efficient way of drinking, and the least damaging to your health.
What do you think about someone having like an Irish coffee then, where you got the whiskey, some Baileys in there, and hitting the caffeine in the morning? Is that like a vacation treat, or would you advise against that?
Well, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a doctor, but the evidence says you shouldn't do it if you want to. I mean, for example, I went to a wine tasting at a local vineyard just down the road from where I live in Kent, in England, because a lot of wine is being grown in Kent, south east England, that little bit on the corner. And because it's effectively now the climate's become like northern France. So there's some quite good wines grown here now. And I went to a wine tasting, and they started serving it at 10 o'clock in the morning. And it was just, I literally had about 2 sips. I felt really, really strange. I was almost under the table. Just a couple of sips of rose. I drink copious amounts of wine in the evening and don't feel a thing. So, have I answered your question? I can't remember what it was now.
What do you think of the morning Baileys in the coffee?
Oh, Baileys, yeah. Well, I wouldn't.
I had a history teacher. Yeah, I had a history teacher that, oh man, it was vodka. I would say like he'd down like 3-4 shots of vodka or added in his coffee every single morning.
This is in high school?
In high school, yeah. I mean, he just smelled like it. And
how old was
he? I would say he was probably like late 50s. And he was always shaking. So he would be like on the alcoholic level. Like he was probably like a necessity. Yeah. So he was always shaking. Nice guy and everything. But God bless him. He passed. But yeah, that was a lot. But probably not a good idea to teach a bunch of high school kids and be wasted.
I imagine that was the only way that he got through the day, though, was with a bunch of monsters in high school.
We were a bunch of monsters. That's interesting. But Tony, so what do you drink? Do you drink wine? Is there a particular, is it, spirits, wine, beer? What is the most healthiest, I guess, if you had to categorize?
My latest book is about wine specifically. The first one is about all three. But and the reason I read the second book on wine is because the authorities were still peddling this myth that alcohol is so bad for you. And I thought, well, I'm going to really hit them between the eyes because I know the evidence on wine is absolutely overwhelming. It's exceptionally good for your health. So I'm going to really knock them for 6 with this book, and they can now hopefully shut the F up. But but unfortunately, I don't think they will. Sorry, what was the question?
Oh, like what do you categorize as the healthiest? And it seems like obviously it's wine because you'd written a book about it. And, we did hear, like in my younger days, we've heard this all before that, a wine a day keeps your heart healthier, a glass of wine a day and that kind of thing. But I guess the question was like what your preference was, and is beer less healthy is for your body to process, I guess,
Well, beer.
I like beer, that's why. So
beer is actually less healthy.
Okay.
For one major reason. You've heard of the beer belly, haven't you?
Yeah, probably have one.
And that is an actual fact. And the reason for that is a little bit of science here. Beer is very high on a thing called the glycemic index. And the glycemic index is a measure of how much glucose is produced by whatever the substance is. Now, beer contains a thing called maltose, which is extremely high in glycemic index, and does actually cause a rush of glucose. And when the glucose is not able to be used up, it gets put down as fat. Now, by contrast, wine doesn't have that effect. It has no glucose producing effect in wine. And there's no such thing as a wine belly, as we all know. And there's no such thing as a spirits belly, because alcohol has got no effect. Alcohol has zero effect on the glycemic index. It's just that beer contains this maltose stuff, which is not very good for. It's okay for your health, but it's not. If you want to keep your weight down, you shouldn't drink it. Going back to wine, I personally favor red wine because the reason that it's got all this color in it is because that shows that it's got more of what's called the polyphenols that are contained within grapes. Now, these polyphenols are antioxidants, which are created by the grape to protect themselves from adverse effects of sunshine and so on. And so they are protective for the grape. They're also protective for us. And the reason that red wine is actually marginally better for your health than white wine is because there are more polyphenols in red wine, and you can tell they're more polyphenols because the color red means that there are more polyphenols. So what I tend to choose are dark-colored wines, particularly the things like Primitivo or Zinfandel, which is the same. I really like these robust, dark red wines. So I know that the evidence is very strong that they're better for my health. But, I think the difference between a claret and a Zinfandel is sort of pretty marginal, to be honest. Claret's got a slightly lighter color, but, by and large, we're talking about fine differences here.
Right. Man, that's unfortunate because I never quite got like the wine, the taste, the wine taste bud. I just always loved beer. Well, that took me a minute to get up there, but I might have to do some switcheroo here.
Yeah, I mean, beer is not bad for you. In fact, it's very good for your heart. It's almost as good for your heart as wine is because it contains alcohol. If you don't have too much of it, you won't get a beer belly. Not too beautiful.
Let's do this. Let's do this. I have a question. If we were to dissect to the audience, like, how does alcohol exactly help the heart? Like in the simplest way that you can describe.
Okay. The simplest way is it is called a vasodilator. Now that means that it thins the blood, and the thinner your blood, the quicker it goes round, and the better circulation and so on. So that's one point, and that reduces your risk of ischemic strokes, for example, and also it also, as is alcohol in general now, it also increases high-density lipoproteins. Now, this is what's called the so-called good cholesterol. It also reduces LDLs, low-density lipoproteins, which are the bad cholesterol, the stuff that gums up your arteries. So on the one hand, HDL, which is the good cholesterol, which mops up too much cholesterol, is increased when you drink alcohol, and LDL is decreased when you drink alcohol. Now, those are two major factors in terms of heart disease. And the thing is that red wine in particular is very good at, I've got a whole chapter on zero alcohol wine and a real wine. And you'd think, zero alcohol wine would be better for you because, it's still got the polyphenols and you've taken away the alcohol. So because alcohol in high doses is bad for you, you'd expect the zero alcohol wines to be better for your health. I expected to find that when I started doing the research. And to my utter surprise, the reverse is actually true. Zero alcohol wine is less good for your health than full alcohol wine. I mean, it's an astonishing set of studies have been done on human beings, looking at their biomarkers of health, looking at blood and urine. It's quite easy to bring people into a laboratory and test the blood and urine. And all of these biomarkers show unequivocally that you need the combination of the alcohol in wine with the polyphenols to create the beneficial health effect. I don't think anybody who knows why I've mentioned one or two things in my book which are suggestive of why that is, but at the moment the research is a little bit sort of iffy, but without going too much detail, to do with I've got a cat coming by me. But it's to do with dopamine in the brain, which enhances the beneficial effect of alcohol. It's an extraordinary chapter, and I think that was one of the things that most people find astonishing in my new book on wine. That it's not only the other thing too is that it's exceptionally good for your gut. Now, the gut is a very is a very, very fashionable part of medicine these days. And we're now realizing that the gut is actually it's called the second brain, because there are so many things in there that actually create a lot of brain chemicals. And it's now become such a fashionable area of interest. It's called the microbiome, because in the gut is full of bacteria, literally trillions. Here's my cat, by the way, literally trillions of bacteria.
Oh, hello, cat. What's their name?
He's
Okay.
I call him White Paws, as he's got white paws.
Hello, White Paws. That's a cutie. That's a cutie.
And
always great to have animal guests on the podcast.
Interrupting
Always
your flow. But the microbiome it's a really fashionable area of medicine, and we now know the microbiome is responsible for, in fact, regulating the immune system. It's that powerful.
Right.
And
So is this because of fermented? When you say like wine is fermented, then that's sort of, you know how they tell us like drink kombucha and fermented yogurts, things of that nature, and that's basically the premise.
Yeah, but the thing is that wine does the same thing as fermented foods. It does. It creates it creates a diverse population of bacteria in the gut, and the researchers have found that actually the more diverse the bacteria, the population of bacteria, the better it is for your immune system. Now, probiotics you mentioned definitely do that, but wine does the same thing. I mean, astonishing. It really is a miraculous substance.
That's so funny. I mean, Jesus drank wine.
Sorry, was that a question? I didn't.
Jesus and our ancestors drank a lot of wine and be merry. He must have known something was good.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Oh, I don't know if you heard me.
Oh, Jesus.
I was going to say Jesus. Yeah, Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, he did. Absolutely.
If it were really bad for you, I guess he wouldn't have drank wine. I heard. I mean, you know, some friends would told me they'd read these books and like historical accounts of Jesus back in the day. They'll do like week-long wedding parties and things, and he celebrated quite a bit. And they drank. They used to drink wine. So I mean, it's in the scriptures.
Turning water into wine. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Seer, fire, thou hast changed the water into wine, and it's better than the stuff we've been drinking. That's unusual, because at this stage in the marriage feast at Cana, you normally should have the worst wine. You should serve the best wine first.
Must be better than water. Yeah. That's awesome. That's great. But this is just like incredibly interesting. But like, I want to know, like, what's your peers like response to your book? Like, how has it been received by the world?
Well, unfortunately, the world as a whole doesn't know about it. I've sold a few thousand copies, but I just sold them millions and millions before the world will start to know about it. And sadly, I've not sold millions, but certainly thousands, quite a few thousands, in fact. But so the reaction has been zero. I've had, obviously, not exactly zero. I've had a lot of support from people in the know in the alcohol research field who have praised the book immensely and said, in fact, I met one of the most leading scientists in this whole area the other day, an American, and he said, everything you've put in your book, I wish I could have said, but politically I'm not allowed to say that sort of thing. But you said every word in your book is correct. And he's one of the leading scientists in this whole field. So I was very chuffed to hear that.
Why is there so much propaganda against alcohol? And you're kind of talking about like marijuana before, but it seems like now they're trying to push marijuana, where it's like a lot of the states have legalized it. And it seems like alcohol has been really just villainized. And I was trying to like think back, I remember my parents, I think you're in your 70s, and my parents are in their late 60s. They're slightly younger than you. But I remember talking to my parents when they were younger, they could drink legally in the United States at 18. Now of course it's 21. My parents, we were talking about like DUIs. Like almost every person knows someone that has a DUI in the U.S. I was talking about my parents about DUIs. They're like, yeah, there's no such thing as a DUI when we were younger. So then I was looking it up, and basically it wasn't really even ubiquitous in the United States. A DUI wasn't until 1972. Before that, it was like 0.15. Now it's 0.08. And then basically the drinking age in the U.S. wasn't raised to 21 until 1988. In the 1980s, to think it was, and here in Puerto Rico, it's still 18, but we're a territory and not a state. So they have different kind of stipulations. And then in order for the federal government to strong arm states, they had to basically mess with 10% of federal highway funding. If they didn't comply, the federal government basically would cut their federal funding budget, which is how they kind of strong arm states, and there's other strings attached to it. But why do we have like this massive attack on alcohol?
Well, I think it's we've mentioned sort of Puritanism. I think as I said, they've won the battle against tobacco, and now the do-gooders or the activists or whatever you characterize them as, and he's looked for something else to do. No, something else to do is go for alcohol. Why not? We've done tobacco. Let's do alcohol, and obviously they'll probably after once they've done alcohol, they'll go to cannabis as well, like they did in the old days. But I think frankly, I think there's some dangers in cannabis, don't you?
They're going to come after caffeine next. I mean, what's the next? I mean, it's always a slippery slope. I mean, what's next? We go caffeine. We're going to go like, I don't know. Should we go after like Jolly Ranchers? I mean, what's the next one? What should we go after? Tea?
Whatever makes the most money.
One of the astonishing facts I discovered about in my book, they have a chapter on cancer, is that there is a risk of breast cancer if you drink wine, a small risk. There's an equally strong risk of getting breast cancer if you drink milk. Equally strong risk, almost identical risk. So perhaps they'll go for milk next. Though I doubt it. So okay, this just tells you that actually this cancer scares is just exaggerated beyond measure. If they were consistent with what they're doing with alcohol, they should put a warning label on a milk bottle. Because it certainly does.
It's like all being like gluten free. I remember I was in Italy for 3 weeks for this wedding with some of my friends. And, all these like women are around that are on like a gluten-free diet, all from the United States. And they would all be like, in the US, they would never eat spaghetti, never eat gluten. And then all of a sudden they're in Italy and they're like, yeah, like the noodles are just so much different here. Like you can enjoy like the noodles, you can enjoy spaghetti because they just make them so much differently. So then I was talking to the manager. And I was like, hey, where do you get your noodles from? And he's like, oh, yeah, they all come from the U.S. And I was like, well, what about all this like gluten-free stuff? And he's like, it's just like tourists. They have no idea what they're talking about, And I'm thinking like, so all these women are like bragging about like how the Italian noodles are so delicious and gluten-free. And he's like, they're just imported from the U.S. Like, and it's the same thing. Like it's basically the placebo effect is I guess what I'm getting at.
I think there are a lot of fads about gluten as well. All that stuff, a lot of food fads. It's just means of copy for journalists, really. But I also think I do also think that people's immune systems are less adaptable than they were in the old days. It could be a whole lot of toxic things in the environment. We're talking about additives and so on. And could be things like mass vaccination. Could be there's an awful lot of things that challenge the immune system, and I think we are less capable of kind of withstanding those sorts of onslaughts as we were. I mean, kids were my youth are pretty healthy and got over colds easily, got a bit of flu, and But food, I mean, the food allergies, for example, came up. I think there's a rough correlation between when food allergies really got quite big and mandatory vaccination. There's just a temporal correlation. It may be more, not maybe or not be the true that one causes the other. But Bobby Kennedy is going to be looking into this big time.
It's kind of like a toss-up. So it's when we published that last podcast, Jesse, do you remember some of the comments? Unless they're bots.
I read the one main comment that I thought was really pertinent, which was the comment about deflecting from the processed food industries, pharmaceutical industries, and deflecting, just like back in the day with smoking. I mean, all the ills of the world were due to smoking instead of lack of exercise, pollution, things like that.
So you think there's a lot of truth to that, would you say? To where it is a deflection?
That could well be the case, yeah. Because also it's a very easy target, because it is certainly, we all know that alcohol, if you get completely rat-assed, you are a menace to other people. So I don't think if there were no neurological effects, I don't think anybody would be bothered, to be honest. It's the behaviour that it causes that gives it such a bad name. But you see, you can't talk about behaviour anymore because nobody hits their wives with a rolling pin anymore. You've got to change the narrative and say, oh no, this is a dangerous substance because it's very bad for your health, and we're so concerned for your health. If they were concerned for your health, they'd be honest about the fact that if you have a little wine a day, it's very good for your health. They won't tell you that.
Yeah, and they won't tell you that.
Because they think people are too stupid. They won't be able to understand that actually a little of something is good for you, and a lot of it is not very good for you. But, so many things are like that, A little water is good for you, but if you drink too much water, you will die. There's a very big J curve on water. If you don't drink any water, you'll also die. So, yeah.
Yeah, speaking of water, like more people die in marathons from being overhydrated than underhydrated. Like it was where it's like where people run around telling people like, oh, your body is so stupid. It doesn't know when it's thirsty. When you're running a marathon, like chug water constantly. People were dying dead in like the 80s and 90s from basically like water toxicity. Of course, you don't really hear that.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. It's water is always like up in a pedestal, and I love water. I mean, I see it that way. It's like water is the best. There's people that I know that drink only water, nothing else, and you feel kind of pure, if you will. But sorry.
But you see, but if you don't drink, if you drink only water, and you don't ever drink wine, the statistics show that you will live 5 years shorter than people who drink wine. The longevity effects of wine drinking are amazing. So you will die 5 years earlier if you drink nothing but water than compared to people who drink wine.
The abstainers.
Astonishing.
That's
abstainers.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
What do you call the abstainers in the UK? The teetotalers? What do they call them?
Teetotalers, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you just the expression?
No, not in the US, no. I had to Google it when I'm reading the book to try to verify. I have no idea. In the US, we don't have the T. It's just abstainer in the US.
Okay. For those watching, if you heard that comment below, I'm pretty sure we'll maybe have some haters on that. The purists, But
yeah, so Tony, I mean, I'm kind of looking at your at the book, The Good News About Booze. And so one of the things I thought was really interesting is you basically, when we were talking about arthritis, as you said, there's pretty much nothing in the world that could actually help arthritis with the exception of drinking alcohol. And then, of course, you talk about diabetes, heart disease, some of the things that we talked about, losing weight, whether you're a beer drinker or wine, spirits, etc. But what is the most powerful effect? I mean, I think if you can actually I shouldn't say cure arthritis, but if you can assist it, that's pretty powerful that there's nothing else that does it. So what are some of the most, powerful, potent attributes of alcohol in regards to health?
I think it's the heart disease one is the most powerful. That was the one that was first discovered way back 100 years ago. When they discovered to the life insurance companies discovered that actually people who drank didn't die as early as people who didn't drink, and it was mainly heart disease that they were cured from, or not exactly cured from, but that was the heart disease issue was the main one, and that's been known for a century. There's diabetes, you mentioned, dementia is important. The other thing is growing old gracefully is actually very important. It's very, very good for old people. There's an expression that scientists use called successful aging. And successful aging is things like not falling over, having reasonably good memory, all of the kind of things that you associate with being old. A whole number of things. But so they've discovered that successful aging is people who drink alcohol successfully age better than people who don't. So going back to living 5 years longer, it's also the same thing as that your lifestyle and the way that you handle life's challenges is actually better when you're an older person if you drink. It's extraordinary. Again, it's utterly amazing fact that. So
Yeah.
That's why, because you mentioned I'm quite old, so I do quite. That's why I drink.
Yeah. What do you know about hormones and alcohol? Is there a correlation that it like if you're a female, it helps you sort of hang on to some of the your really essential hormones?
As far as I know, there's not much connection. I'm trying to remember
studies.
I'm trying to remember menopause issues. One of the things that happens in menopause is you lose bone mass density. You get osteoporosis. Now, actually, wine is extremely good for osteoporosis. But I can't think of anything else that is osteoporosis is hormonally related. Once you get to the menopause, you lose estrogen, and therefore, your bones crack up. So I presume, I don't know the mechanism, but I presume alcohol will do something for estrogen then, if it does reduce the risk of osteoporosis. But I'm only guessing though.
I wonder if someone will go on to maybe later on continue to find out if there's some sort of connection with healthy or hormonal balance and wine. That'll be your next book. I don't know.
I don't think anyone's done very much research on that, to be honest.
I was reading this article called "Functional Benefits of Modest Alcohol Consumption," and this article published in the Adaptive Human Behavior and Physiology, it says that despite considerable research of the misuse of alcohol, no one has ever asked why it might have become universally adopted. In contrast, we suggest that alcohol consumption was adopted because it has social benefits that relate both to health and social bonding. We combine data from a national survey from more detailed behavioral and observational studies to show that social drinkers have more friends on whom they can depend on for emotional and other support, feel more engaged with and trusting of their local community. Alcohol is known to trigger the endorphin system, and the social consumption of alcohol may thus have the same effects as many other social activities such as laughter, singing, and dancing that we use as a means of servicing and reinforcing social bonds. And I think, we last time in our podcast where we talked about the blue zones, where you have these pockets in the world where you have these centurions, a big component was just the social component. You have a purpose to live. You have a reason to live. You have a community. You have people to hang out with. And I think that part gets pretty lost. Would you rather stay in the house and watch Survivor, Or would you rather go out to the local pub, have a couple drinks, bullshit with some friends, walk to the pub, get some exercise, get some sunlight, maybe sit out on the porch, soak in that sun, that kind of stuff, right? That you wouldn't necessarily get without the so-called liquid courage,
No, I agree. And the blue zone thing is interesting. Another thing I point out in the book, which is a very strong, very highly researched field, is Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet, as we well know, is lots of fresh fish, vegetables, and so on, olive oil, blah, 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 blah. But the key component of the Mediterranean diet, which accounts for the longevity of people in Sardinia, for example, is red wine. It accounts for 15% of the value of the Mediterranean diet, which is, everyone now admits, is the most healthy diet in the world. So there are a lot of good reasons, apart from the sociability of alcohol, that show that, in terms of dietary effects, wine is extremely valuable.
Today's guest has been Tony Edwards, the author of 2 very fascinating books about alcohol. One's called The Good News About Booze, his latest book, The Very Good News About Wine. Tony, just let us know where we can find your books and leave us with a final thought related to this podcast, or just something that you want to discuss as it's been just kind of percolating in your mind.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much for inviting me. You'll tell your readers and listeners that the book is only available on Amazon. The reason for that is I could not find a publisher for it. So it is published by me. The publishers, I went to a lot of publishers and they all said, we don't want to hear good news about alcohol. We know that alcohol is bad for you. So there's a very strange self-censorship going on in the publishing business. Anyway, I do thank Jeff Bezos for the fact that he does allow people to publish works of scurrilous works like the ones that I've done here. So find the book on Amazon, both books, and I hope your listeners enjoy them.
What's your final thought, Tony?
Do read the books because they are very, very informative. I wrote them because, as a kind of reference manual, although they're easy to read, they're based on a lot of scientific studies. And the Good News About Booze, there are about 500 studies that I reference. And in Wine book, about 300 studies. These are all published studies. So what I've done is, I'm a bit nerdy sort of person. I enjoy looking at the research that's actually been published, particularly if the research that's been published contradicts the official narrative. That really gets me going. So I would advise you to buy the books and use them as a reference point. Chapters on cancer, as I say, some cancers are caused by drinking, and some are prevented by drinking. So it's a very interesting story there. A chapter on heart disease, chapter on diabetes, chapter on dementia. And again, for old people, there's a whole chapter on longevity, showing that actually for old people, drinking is very important. They will live longer and happier and healthier lives if they drink than if they don't. So I think the news is exceptionally good. And also your listeners will be able to see that they can look up the scientific studies that I quote, and they can look at them on Google and check that I'm not putting a fast one. Verify, while reading the actual studies, although I have to say they're rather dull, these studies, but I wouldn't advise reading them. But I'm that sort of nerdy person. But please do read the books, learn from them, and you'll learn how to drink healthily and happily.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.